And this is also the first with your new cues on it, so it's Julian Antos made the beautiful new scratch keys on this print. I think that in and of itself speaks to how celluloid can change context to context, how every time you view a film print, even if it's the same print, it's a different sort of thing based on like what marks have ended up on the print or who's running it. So I was wondering, ton's not that much, and I know you weren't in the audience tonight, but you did see a reel on screen. So I was wondering if you could speak at all, if you've noticed anything, any sort of like variation or like breadth of experiences in terms of like projection or viewing this particular print in a cinema like this.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I spent so long obviously watching all of the material in the film over and over again while I was editing it, and so I got to know every tiny, because obviously the fragments that make up the film, many of them are already very damaged, and they look not as they did when they were made, but as they do today in their best available form. And so that was always, a huge part of what I wanted the film to express was this imbalance in the material. I think there's often, especially with work like this, that kind of attempts to combine material from all around the world and from different eras and different traditions. There's always a temptation to lean into that idea of cinema as this unified thing, this kind of universal language and great level playing field in which all cultures have an equal stake. And you need only look at how unevenly preserved film is from different corners of the globe and different genres and commercial realms to realize how much that's not the case. So you can see obviously within the film the disparity. And so the way I always think of this print is sort of that my film is now obviously slowly wearing away, screening by screening, but plenty of the material in it has this massive head start. But of course I know exactly all the degradation that already exists in each of those clips, so I can see that scratch wasn't there before. Of these 15 scratches, that one wasn't there.
Has anyone put scratches on this already?
Yeah, that's
name names, tell us.
There's little things in there, but obviously no one else would notice at this point. It's still pretty pristine. But yeah, I mean, it regardless of that evidence kind of not having quite shown itself yet, at least to somebody who hasn't seen it as much as I have. The thing that's been really palpable for me is how much the film is alive now, that it's up in that room, that it's running through a projector, that it's playing to all of these people. I mean, I kind of worried that I would feel very anxious once the print existed and once it had this kind of palpable lifespan to it. But actually feeling how real it now is and how much, regardless of how long it's in the world, a growing number of people are going away and taking some part of it with them, has made it feel very, very living to me. And I did sit up in the little side booth for the last 10 minutes and heard the projector run and watched the final scenes play out, and it felt very real.
Yeah, I mean, it is, you touched on this, but even though it is a film that is designed to disappear at some point, the reality is that running film now is such a specialized activity that you generally don't run into projectionists that are going to totally fuck it up and destroy it forever. You have paradoxically given it a longer life by printing it on film, because film is such a wonderful preservation medium. Although there's things you were talking about scratches, it's also printed on color stock, which will age in this totally bizarre way, and all of a sudden one day your beautiful black and white film will be like green and white or something. But that is an afterlife for this. So one of our regulars, Mike Quinteros, sent us all this incredible information. I forwarded it to you about squeamishness around seeing people who have died in films. In the early days of cinema, there was this sort of a hesitance to release films that featured performers who had died at some point before the screenings. And I don't know, I guess where that is leading me is just that this obviously requires a lot of research into like which of these performers have died, when they died, that kind of thing. So I was wondering if you could speak to like the kind of selection process, how if you ran into any kind of like challenges during that research, or like learned anything I don't know, interesting.
Yeah, no, I found that material that he sent over, which was sort of clippings from Variety and other trade publications about controversies in the 1920s and 30s around showing films in which the lead actors had since died, which obviously now seems bizarre, but I think that speaks to so many things, but one of them is, especially in the youth of the medium, the uncanniness of starting to see the living and the dead coexist on screen, after I suppose a couple of decades in which the vast majority of films that existed would have still had almost entirely living casts. And that certainly was also an uncanny thing for me when I was starting to put it together. I would come across clips that I wanted to use, and then I would find out that one cast member out of 5 or 6 or whatever was still alive. And strangely, it felt kind of wrong that could be the case, if that makes sense. Like, because it would invariably be that someone had lived, was still alive at 102 or whatever. And it really changed my perception of the material, that it went from in some ways a unified image to a disharmonious one. When you realise that there was this kind of holdout, not to sound too morbid, but I think there is something kind of uncanny about that, and in some ways there's a sort of strange closure to when a sequence features only these sort of traces of people who are no longer around. And the research process, which was obviously necessary to compile the end credits and make sure that the premise was being sort of upheld, only heightened that sense for me, because inevitably I learned so much about these people, both their lives, the circumstances and nature of their deaths. And it really imbued their performances with a totally different meaning for me, especially as in so many cases when they died young or tragically, I really couldn't see those performances the same way again. And although none of that context is given in the film, for me that's all kind of there in some way, especially obviously if you recognise the odd person within the film. So yeah, I think for me it's a film about real people as much as it's a film about performance and character, and knowing more and more about those people really was a huge part of the process.
So